Long ago, in the vastness of the galaxy, a strange and ancient warning was passed down among the stars. It was a warning that many people, across many worlds, ignored. It came from an ancient race known as the Zarnathi, a species that once ruled the outer regions of space. The Zarnathi were wise and powerful, and they had seen many things. But there was one thing they warned everyone about. Never disturb the humans. It might sound strange to you. After all, who were these humans? At the time, they were just a young, primitive species living on a small blue planet called Earth. They had no idea how to travel the stars or communicate with other civilizations. Their technology was basic, and they were still learning to overcome their own wars and problems. The Zarnathi, however, had seen something in humans that no one else had. They saw potential, and not the good kind of potential. No, the Zarnathi feared what would happen if humans ever learned to reach beyond their planet. But this warning was written down long ago, and over time, it was forgotten. Most species laughed it off as a myth. The idea that humans, who had barely left their planet's atmosphere, could one day be a threat to the galaxy seemed ridiculous. They were nothing more than a tiny speck in the vastness of space. After all, many species had faced extinction, wars, and chaos. Why would the humans be any different? But not everyone thought this way. Some believed in the warning, especially a few curious beings like Commander Varel of the Geltran fleet. Varel was young, bold, and ambitious. The Geltran were a species that had a great interest in exploring new planets and learning about other civilizations. Varel's fascination with Earth was growing. He'd studied old reports, listened to the stories, and even looked into the long-forgotten warning from the Zarnathi. While many dismissed it as superstition, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of doubt. There were strange signals coming from the direction of Earth. The humans had begun developing some form of advanced technology, faster than the Geltran had expected. Varel, who was eager to prove himself, decided it was time to take action. He believed it was safe to investigate, to see what the humans were really like. After all, if they were truly a primitive species, then what harm could they cause? So, without much hesitation, he convinced his superiors to approve a mission to Earth. It wasn't an invasion, just a scouting mission. They would send ships to observe the humans, gather information, and learn about their culture. The Geltran fleet prepared, sending out a small group of ships. Their sensors pointed towards Earth's orbit. They were confident this would be just another easy exploration. After all, how could humans possibly be a threat? But what Varel didn't know was that humans had been changing. Earth had gone through wars, destruction, and long periods of hardship. But through it all, humans had learned to adapt. They were survivors. They had discovered new ways of thinking, building, and fighting. And now, they were on the verge of something big. They were beginning to understand things that no one ever thought possible. When the Geltran ships arrived near Earth, they had no idea what they were about to face. The humans didn't greet them with open arms or even fear. No, the humans reacted differently. They didn't cower in terror like the Zarnathi might have expected. Instead, they began to study the ships. They quickly realized that these visitors from the stars weren't the only ones in space. They were just another species, just another opportunity to learn. It didn't take long for humans to reverse engineer parts of the Geltran technology. They studied the ships, the materials, and the weapons. At first, the Geltran couldn't believe their eyes. The humans were learning faster than they expected. Within just a few years, they had built new weapons based on Geltran technology. But it wasn't just about weapons. Humans were beginning to understand advanced sciences, physics, and even space travel at a rate that no one had anticipated. Their creativity was their greatest strength, and it terrified the Geltran. Despite all the warning signs, Commander Varel and his fleet pushed forward, believing that this was just a harmless contact. What they didn't know was that Earth's humans were already on the brink of something greater than they could have ever imagined. One day, the Geltran fleet tried to make contact with the humans, but it was too late. The humans had already started developing their own space fleet, and they weren't interested in peaceful exploration anymore. Instead of communicating with the Geltran, the humans saw them as a threat, just another foreign presence trying to control them. They would not be subdued. In the blink of an eye, the humans launched a surprise attack. They had built weapons, based on Geltron technology, but they also had their own innovative designs, much more advanced than anyone had imagined. The first battle was a shock to the Geltron fleet. The humans fought with ferocity, using tactics that were unlike anything the Geltron had encountered before. They were relentless, determined, and they had learned quickly. What Varel and his people didn't know was that they were facing a species unlike any they had ever encountered. Humans didn't fight like other species. They fought with passion, with a fierce will to protect their home. They fought to win, not just for survival, but because they believed in something greater: freedom. It didn't take long for the Geltron to realize they were outmatched. Their ships were outnumbered, and their once superior technology was being overwhelmed by the humans' resourcefulness. Commander Varel, though brave and skilled, was forced to retreat. The mission had failed, but the consequences were far worse than anyone could have imagined. The humans had just begun their journey into space, and now they had tasted the power of the stars. The galaxy would never be the same again. This first part introduces the main conflict and the growing threat of humanity. It paints a picture of the Geltron's disbelief and underestimation of humans and sets the stage for the conflict that will unfold. The tone is meant to be engaging, with a sense of mystery and excitement, building up to a major turning point in the story. When the Geltron fleet first arrived near Earth, they had expected a simple mission. They believed they were coming to explore a planet full of primitive life, unaware that they were about to encounter something far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Humans, though young and inexperienced in the ways of the galaxy, had already proven they were anything but weak. At first, the Geltron commanders were confident. They had sent a small fleet to observe Earth, expecting to find a species that could barely leave its atmosphere, let alone reach the stars. But humanity's curiosity and quick learning would turn out to be their greatest strengths, and the Geltron would soon realize how terribly wrong they were. When the Geltron ships entered Earth's orbit, they sent peaceful signals, hoping to establish communication with the humans. They waited for Earth to respond. But instead of greeting them with fear, confusion, or curiosity, humans did something strange. They started studying the ships. Humans were not afraid. They were fascinated. The first humans to discover the alien ships were scientists, researchers, and engineers who had been working on their own projects for years. They were in the middle of developing advanced technology, including spacefaring ships capable of reaching the outer planets of the solar system. So when the Geltron ships arrived, the humans didn't panic. Instead, they saw this as an opportunity to learn, to study, and maybe even to improve their own technology. And that's exactly what they did. In the beginning, the Geltron ships didn't notice much. They thought humans were simply watching them from afar. They didn't realize that the humans were working, learning from the alien ships. The humans were quick to reverse engineer the technology they found. The metal alloys the Geltron used, the engines that powered their ships, even the energy weapons. Humans were getting the hang of it faster than anyone expected. It was as if they had an innate ability to understand new technologies and improve them. Soon, humans were able to build their own version of the Geltron ships. At first, these ships were small and crude compared to the Geltron originals, but they worked. They had their own power sources, their own engines, and their own weapons, each one built from knowledge that was only recently discovered. It wasn't long before the humans had their own space fleet. They were ready to leave Earth and explore the stars, just as the Geltron had done centuries before. But humanity's response was not one of curiosity alone. It was a desire to conquer. The Geltron had underestimated humanity's drive. They had underestimated how quickly humans could adapt to new technology and how fiercely they would fight to protect their planet. Humans, for all their flaws, had learned to survive. They had endured wars, diseases, and countless hardships on their homeworld. Now they had learned how to take on a far bigger challenge, space itself, and the Geltron would pay the price for their miscalculation. The human response, Once humans began to understand the true power of the alien technology they had uncovered, their response was nothing short of aggressive. The first real sign of this came when they built their own ships based on Geltran designs. These ships were much smaller and less powerful than the Geltran originals. But they had one thing the Geltran never expected. Humans didn't give up easily. They learned quickly. They improved upon what they had. The Geltran had no idea what they were up against. They still believed they were dealing with a fragile species, one that would bow down to their superior technology. But as humanity began to build more ships and launch them into space, the Geltran fleet took notice. Earth's forces were no longer just observers. They were becoming players in the grand game of galactic power. And so the Geltran decided to make their first official move. They didn't want war with humanity, not yet. Instead, they sent a diplomatic envoy, a group of Geltran ambassadors who would meet with human leaders to discuss peaceful coexistence. But the humans had a different idea. As the Geltran ships arrived in Earth's orbit, they were greeted by a surprise. Instead of offering peace, the humans launched a sudden strike, an unexpected attack using newly developed space weaponry. The Geltran fleet had been caught off guard. Human weapons, based on their reverse-engineered Geltran technology, were now a real threat. The humans didn't hesitate. The Geltran ships were forced to retreat, and this was the first real sign that humans were not to be underestimated. The Geltran ambassadors had come with hopes of peaceful negotiations, but instead, they were sent back in disgrace. The humans had sent a message loud and clear. They were not afraid. They had no interest in peaceful coexistence. They wanted to control their own fate. The escalation of conflict. The attack was just the beginning. In the years that followed, humanity began to expand their fleet rapidly. They weren't just copying Geltran technology anymore. They were improving it. They developed new types of engines, stronger weapons, and better defenses. It was as though their progress had no limits. By the time the Geltran realized the true danger of humanity, it was too late. The human fleets were now an unstoppable force. They had taken their technology and enhanced it to a level that far surpassed what the Geltran had anticipated, and they were eager to prove themselves. With their new spacefaring abilities, humans began to venture beyond Earth's orbit. They made it to the Moon, to Mars, and beyond. As they pushed further into space, they encountered new alien species who had been living peacefully in their corners of the galaxy for centuries. At first, the humans were content to study these new life forms and trade with them. But as they grew stronger, their desire for power and dominance began to take over. Humanity's thirst for conquest grew stronger. They no longer viewed other species as equals. They viewed them as obstacles to be removed. The humans began taking over planets, starting with their immediate neighbors in the solar system. They didn't stop to ask for permission. They simply claimed new territory. At this point, the Geltran realized they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the humans. They had thought they could control the situation by observing from a distance, but they were wrong. The humans had shown that they weren't just a curious species. They were a ruthless one. The first major conflict, the first real galactic battle between humans and the Geltran, occurred at the outer edge of the solar system near the asteroid belt. The Geltran, still reeling from the initial surprise attack, tried to rally their forces and engage the humans in a full-scale war. But by this time, the humans were ready. They had already developed a fleet of advanced ships that rivaled anything the Geltran had ever seen. When the two forces clashed, the results were devastating. The Geltran fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, was quickly overwhelmed. The humans fought with strategies and tactics that the Geltran hadn't anticipated. They didn't just rely on their advanced technology. They relied on creative and adaptable thinking. Humans could change their plans in the middle of a battle, think on their feet, and adapt to new situations faster than the Geltran could keep up. In the end, the Geltran fleet was forced to retreat again, but this time, they didn't just lose the battle. They lost their reputation. Humanity's dominance in space was now undeniable. They had shown the galaxy that they were no longer a fragile species. They were a force to be reckoned with. As the Geltron fled the battlefield, they realized the truth. The galaxy was no longer safe. The humans had just begun their journey and no one could stop them now. After the stunning defeat of the Geltron fleet at the hands of the humans, the galaxy knew something had changed. The once peaceful and thriving civilizations that stretched across the stars suddenly found themselves looking over their shoulders. The humans, whose existence had been considered insignificant just a few years ago, had turned into a force too powerful to ignore. They had not just learned to fight, they had learned to conquer. The humans weren't satisfied with simply defending their homeworld anymore. They weren't interested in just protecting Earth and its immediate surroundings. No, they had tasted the power of the stars, and now they were hungry for more. The first few victories had been enough to give them the confidence to expand, and expand they did. At first, the galaxy watched in disbelief as humanity began its push outward. They moved slowly at first, just beyond Earth's orbit, conquering the Moon and Mars. But that was only the beginning. Soon, the human fleets began to venture further, into the asteroid belt, into the outer planets. And each time they encountered a new world, they didn't just make peace, they claimed it. The humans weren't just exploring anymore. They were expanding their empire, taking over planets, moons, and asteroid colonies as if they were their birthright. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. Most species who had been around for thousands, even millions of years, thought they could easily deal with these newcomers. After all, humans were still so young, so primitive in many ways. But the humans had a gift for war, and their war machine was now moving at an unstoppable pace. The new fleet. The first few battles, though shocking, were just a preview of what was to come. The humans didn't stop with the technology they had stolen from the Geltron. They improved it. Every time they won, they took the knowledge from their enemies and made their own weapons even more deadly. The human fleet grew rapidly. What began as a handful of ships capable of defending Earth was now an armada that could strike at any part of the galaxy. They designed new ships, faster, stronger, and better equipped to fight in the depths of space. These ships were equipped with advanced energy shields, heavy artillery, and laser weapons that could cut through enemy defenses like butter. The human engineers working in secret labs and high-tech facilities pushed the boundaries of technology, creating weapons that were beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Each new ship was an improvement over the last, and soon the humans had fleets that rivaled the most powerful empires in the galaxy. The first conquests. By now it was clear that humans weren't just an isolated threat anymore. Their war machine was moving, and the galaxy had no choice but to take notice. But it wasn't just the Geltron who were worried. The whole galaxy was starting to fear what humanity could do. The peacekeepers of the galaxy, the races who had long since established their dominance, had to act. The first species to feel the humans' wrath were the Flaris, a peaceful, highly intelligent race known for their advanced technology and beautiful homeworld. The Flaris had never known war and were unprepared for the human onslaught. They had heard of the humans and their swift victories, but they didn't believe it could happen to them. They thought that their own technological advantage would protect them. The humans, however, had a different plan. They didn't want peace or cooperation. They wanted to expand. The Flaris were simply in their way. One by one, human ships began to slip through the Flaris defenses. At first, the Flaris tried to resist, but they couldn't match the humans' overwhelming power. Within just a few short months, the Flaris homeworld was taken over. The once proud race was now enslaved, their cities reduced to ruins. Next, it was the turn of the Coralline, a species known for their mastery of biological warfare. The Coralline had long been considered untouchable, but humanity wasn't intimidated. Using the technology they had developed in secret, the humans unleashed a biological weapon of their own, a bioweapon that could break down the Coralline's natural defenses. The humans didn't hesitate. They struck hard, and the Coralline were forced to surrender. It wasn't just about taking over worlds anymore. The humans weren't content with simply defeating these races. They were eliminating them. They would leave nothing behind. Cities, planets, and cultures that had existed for thousands of years were destroyed, as humans systematically erased everything in their path. Their technology was so advanced that many of the galaxy's greatest civilizations couldn't even comprehend the level of destruction the humans were capable of. The Ravak, one of the oldest and most feared species in the galaxy, were the Ravak, known for their near immortality and advanced psychic powers. The Ravak had long been considered the guardians of peace in the galaxy. They were respected, even feared by every other race, and they believed themselves to be invincible. But as the humans began to tear through the galaxy, the Ravak felt something they had never felt before: fear. The Ravak tried to intervene. They sent emissaries to Earth demanding that the humans cease their expansion and stop their attacks on other species. They sent ships, hoping to intimidate the humans into submission, but the humans did not back down. They saw the Ravak as just another obstacle to overcome. What the Ravak didn't realize was that humanity was no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for something greater. They were fighting to shape their own destiny. They wanted to rule. And when the Ravak launched an attack against the human fleet, the humans did something no one had ever expected. They defeated the Ravak in a single battle. Using new psychic countermeasures developed by human scientists, the humans disabled the Ravak's powerful psychic abilities. Without their greatest strength, the Ravak were powerless. The humans struck quickly and decisively, obliterating the Ravak's fleet and forcing them to surrender. For the first time in the history of the galaxy, the Ravak were defeated, not by their own enemies but by humans. This battle marked a turning point in the galaxy's history. The Ravak, once considered unbeatable, had fallen. And now, humanity stood alone as the most powerful force in the galaxy. A new era of power. As the humans expanded further, they began to establish their own empire. They didn't just conquer planets, they brought them into their fold. Earth became the capital of this new galactic empire, and humanity's rule stretched out across the stars. Other species, once proud and powerful, were forced to bow before the humans. Those who resisted were wiped out, while others were either enslaved or used as resources to fuel the human war machine. By now, the humans had established colonies on nearly every habitable planet in the galaxy. They had transformed the very landscape of space, creating new cities, new technology, and new ways of life that were all under the control of Earth's government. The galaxy, once home to hundreds of diverse species, was now a place where humanity ruled with an iron fist. But even as the humans celebrated their victories, there was still one question that lingered in the minds of many. What next? The humans had conquered everything in their path, but they weren't satisfied. Their eyes were already set on the next frontier, the stars beyond what they had already claimed. They had tasted the power of the galaxy, and there was no turning back now. The galaxy was now in the hands of humans, and no one knew what would happen next. As humanity expanded through the galaxy, taking control of planet after planet, their power seemed unstoppable. Their fleets were vast, their weapons were unmatched, and they had made an empire that stretched across many star systems. But as the humans continued their conquest, something unexpected began to happen. A growing resistance, a force of unity from the other species in the galaxy. The once peaceful races, now united by fear and hatred, decided they could no longer stand by and watch the humans conquer everything in their path. This led to the beginning of a massive war, the likes of which the galaxy had never seen before. What started as scattered pockets of resistance began to form into something much larger, something much more organized, a true galactic rebellion. The spark of rebellion, it all started with a single, unexpected attack. The Geltran, the first race to feel the wrath of humanity, had been humiliated after their defeat. They were the first to try to fight back, but they were not the only ones. Across the galaxy, other species began to see the humans as a threat that could no longer be ignored. The Geltran, still reeling from their earlier loss, had spent years hiding in the shadows, building a new fleet with the help of other races, who were equally afraid of the humans. They weren't the only ones. The Flaris, the Karalan, and the Ravak, all of whom had suffered under human rule, now secretly met and began planning. At first, these species had fought individually, but now they realized they had to join forces if they had any hope of defeating humanity. The first real sign of the rebellion's power came when the Geltron launched a surprise attack on Earth itself. They knew they could not win alone, so they called for help from other oppressed species. In a series of coordinated strikes, the Geltron and their allies sent their fleets to Earth. But the humans had been preparing for this. They had learned from their previous battles, and their fleet was ready. The battle for Earth was fierce. The Geltron fleet, with all its new allies, managed to land a few hits, but they could not breach the Earth's defenses. The humans fought back with everything they had, using their advanced technology and military tactics to defend their homeworld. This battle, however, would set the stage for what would become the greatest war the galaxy had ever witnessed. The rise of the Galactic Rebellion. The human victory on Earth was only the beginning of the war. While they had successfully repelled the attack, the rebellion grew stronger. The Geltron, Flaris, Corlin, and Ravak were now united, and they began recruiting other species to join their cause. Their message was clear. The humans must be stopped before they destroy everything. Soon, small skirmishes and ambushes became full-scale battles. The humans, though powerful, were not invincible. The other species began to learn from their mistakes and started to use human tactics against them. The war spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and every major system became a battleground. The humans, for the first time, were caught off guard. They had spent so much time conquering that they had failed to notice how quickly the other species were banding together. The resistance was no longer a scattered group of rebels. It had turned into a galactic war machine. The galactic battlefronts, as the war intensified, the galaxy was split into two sides. On one side were the humans, with their vast fleets and powerful technology. On the other side were the rebellion forces, an alliance of every race that had been subjugated by the humans. The war front stretched across countless star systems, from the icy planets of the outer rim to the crowded worlds near the core. Space battles became the most common sight in the galaxy. The rebellion learned quickly how to fight the human way, using fast, nimble ships and surprise attacks. The humans, with their superior firepower, were forced to adapt. They couldn't simply rely on brute force anymore. They had to fight smarter. The battles were brutal. Explosions lit up the dark void of space as ships from both sides collided. Planets were bombarded, moons shattered into pieces, and entire fleets were lost. The humans, once victorious and unstoppable, found themselves in a stalemate. The rebellion, fueled by their desire to free their people from the humans' iron grip, was relentless. But the humans were not going to go down without a fight. They called upon their greatest weapon, the human spirit. Every defeat was met with a counterattack. Every lost battle made them more determined to push forward. The human resolve was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. They didn't know how to quit. The turning point. The turning point in the war came during a decisive battle at the planet Varnus, a strategic location in the center of the galaxy. Varnus was a vital supply world for both sides, and whoever controlled it would control the flow of resources. The humans sent their best fleets to Varnus, determined to win at all costs. But the rebellion had a secret weapon, something the humans hadn't anticipated. The Corlin, the same species the humans had defeated in the past, had developed a new biological weapon, one that could disable human technology. They had created a virus that, when released, would disrupt the human ship's electronic systems, rendering them useless. The Corallin, working with the Geltron and the other races, launched their attack on Varnus. The humans, caught off guard by the virus, found their ships powerless. The rebellion's fleets, prepared for this moment, struck with precision and overwhelming force. The battle for Varnus was decisive. For the first time, the humans were pushed back. Their fleets, once unstoppable, were forced to retreat. The rebellion now had the upper hand, and the humans realized they had made a critical mistake. They had underestimated their enemies. The galaxy had united, and for the first time in years, the humans were on the defensive. The cost of war. The war was far from over, but the humans had lost their dominance. The rebellion had gained ground, but both sides had suffered heavy losses. The galaxy was in ruins. Entire civilizations were destroyed. Entire planets turned to dust. The humans had learned a hard lesson. No empire could last forever. Their ambition to dominate the galaxy had led them to war, and war had brought destruction to everything they had built. The cost of the war was felt across the galaxy. The once thriving worlds were now in ruins, their populations decimated. Cities lay in rubble, and the scars of battle could be seen everywhere. The humans, who had once been a small, insignificant species, had now become part of a galaxy-wide conflict, one that would define the future of the universe. As the war continued, both sides faced difficult choices. The humans, despite their technological superiority, had to ask themselves, was the price of victory worth it? And the rebellion, now on the verge of success, had to consider what they would do after the humans were defeated. What kind of galaxy would they create once the dust settled? The human resolve, despite their losses, humanity was not about to give up. They had come too far. Earth had been their home, and it would always be their home. They were fighters, and they would fight to the very end. The human spirit had never been more alive. The rebellion might have pushed humanity to the edge, but the humans had never backed down from a fight. If anything, they had only become more determined to prove that they could survive, that they could win. The war was far from over, but one thing was clear: the humans had awakened something in the galaxy. No longer were they the weak, insignificant species they had once been. They were now a force to be reckoned with, and the galaxy would never be the same again. As the galaxy continued to burn with the fires of war, the humans faced a moment of truth. For years they had built an empire, crushing any species that dared to oppose them. But now, for the first time, they found themselves on the defensive. The rebellion, a coalition of every species they had ever conquered, had turned the tide of the war. The humans, once confident in their superiority, were now being pushed to the brink of defeat. The galaxy was on the edge of collapse, and no one knew what would happen next. The human struggle. Despite their setbacks, the humans were not ready to give up. They had fought their way to the top, and they weren't going to let go of their empire without a fight. Earth, the beating heart of their empire, was under constant threat. The rebellion had its sights set on the capital, knowing that if they could destroy Earth, they could crush humanity's will to fight. Every human fleet, every soldier, every weapon was now focused on protecting their home. The humans knew they couldn't win by brute force alone. They had to be smarter, faster, and more resourceful than ever before. They started using every advantage they could find. They built new, invisible warships that could strike without warning. They used advanced deception tactics to confuse and mislead the rebellion. They didn't just rely on their weapons, they used their wits to outsmart their enemies. But despite these efforts, the humans couldn't stop the rebellion from getting closer and closer to Earth. The rebellion had become a powerful force, and their resolve was stronger than ever. As Earth faced the possibility of being overrun, something unexpected happened. A new hope emerged from within humanity. The voice of the people in the midst of all the chaos, a new leader emerged, a person who spoke to the heart of the human spirit. His name was Captain Elias Winters. He was not a high-ranking official in the military. In fact, he was a former soldier who had lost his family during the early days of the war. Winters had seen the devastation firsthand and had felt the deep pain of losing everything. But instead of giving up, he used that pain to fuel his determination to protect humanity. Elias Winters wasn't just a military leader, he was a symbol. He gave the people hope, and his voice spread across the galaxy. He spoke of a future where humanity could rebuild, a future where peace could be achieved, not through war, but through cooperation. He didn't just want to win the war, he wanted to end it, to find a way to stop the cycle of destruction. He was able to rally both civilians and soldiers alike. His message of unity, sacrifice, and hope spread like wildfire, reaching even those who had once been loyal to the Empire. The humans needed something more than just a victory on the battlefield. They needed something to believe in. The rebellion's internal struggles. The rebellion, despite its strength, wasn't without its own problems. The unity that had brought together so many species was beginning to crack. The races that had once been oppressed by the humans were starting to question the rebellion's methods. Some of the factions wanted total revenge on the humans, pushing for their complete annihilation, while others, influenced by Winter's words, began to wonder if a peaceful solution was possible. Tensions rose within the rebellion. The Geltron, who had suffered the most, were the hardest to convince. They wanted the humans destroyed, nothing less. But other factions, like the Flaris and the Revak, were more open to negotiation. They had lost much in the war, but they also saw the possibility of rebuilding if the fighting could stop. They believed that, just like humanity, they could start fresh if they could learn from their mistakes. The galaxy was in turmoil. The rebellion had become divided, and this division was weakening their cause. Some leaders began to see the potential for a peace agreement, while others saw only the need for victory at all costs. The final battle, as the war dragged on, both sides knew that the end was near. The humans couldn't hold out forever, and the rebellion knew they had to strike hard and fast to defeat the humans once and for all. The humans, under the leadership of Captain Winters, made one final push to defend Earth and the heart of their empire. In a desperate bid to win, the humans launched a massive counteroffensive. The rebellion had gathered its fleets, and Earth was once again at the center of the war. The battle that ensued would go down in history as one of the greatest and most devastating battles ever fought in the galaxy. Both sides threw everything they had into the conflict. The skies above Earth were filled with exploding ships, and the ground below shook as the two sides clashed. As the battle reached its peak, Winters did something that shocked everyone. He sent a message to the rebellion. With all of humanity's strength at the brink of exhaustion, he offered a ceasefire. He called for a meeting with the leaders of the rebellion, proposing a solution that would avoid further bloodshed. The humans were tired of fighting, and they were willing to listen. The peace proposal, Captain Winters' message, was met with mixed reactions. Some of the rebellion's leaders, particularly the Geltron, rejected it outright. They wanted the humans to pay for the destruction they had caused. But others, like the Flaris and the Revak, saw the wisdom in his words. They had fought for years, lost countless lives, and devastated entire planets. They were ready to listen, to find a way to stop the fighting. A summit was held, with representatives from both the humans and the rebellion present. It was a tense meeting, full of distrust and anger, but it was also full of hope. Winters spoke from the heart, urging the two sides to consider the future, not just the past. He said, "We can continue this war, but all we will have left are ruins. If we want our children to have a future, we need to make a change. Let's end the fighting, rebuild, and learn from our mistakes. We can have peace, not by destroying each other, but by coming together." It was a bold move, one that could have cost Winters his life. But in that moment, he offered a chance for something greater than victory. He offered the possibility of a new beginning. A new beginning. In the days that followed the summit, the galaxy was thrown into uncertainty. Would the rebellion accept the peace offer? Would humanity's enemies forgive them? There were still those who wanted to see the humans destroyed, but gradually, a shift occurred. The leaders of the rebellion began to see that Captain Winters' words had merit. The humans had made mistakes, but they were also willing to change. Finally, the peace agreement was signed, and for the first time in many years, the galaxy was at peace. The humans had lost their empire, but in doing so, they had gained something more valuable: respect. The other species, while still wary of humanity, agreed to work together to rebuild the galaxy. The war was over, and humanity had a chance to start again, not as conquerors but as part of a united galaxy. The humans, who had once been seen as a force of destruction, now had the opportunity to prove they could be a force for good. They would work with the other species to rebuild what had been lost. The future of the galaxy was uncertain, but there was hope. The cycle of destruction had finally ended, and the galaxy was ready to heal. The legacy of Captain Winters. Captain Elias Winters became a hero, not just for humanity but for the entire galaxy. His message of peace and cooperation had saved the galaxy from further destruction. He didn't just lead humanity to victory, he led them to understanding, to a new way of life. Though the humans had once been conquerors, they had learned the hard way that true power came not from domination but from unity. And the galaxy, once fractured by war, now had the chance to rebuild. A new era had begun.